Welcome to the NJ Criminal Podcast.
Welcome back to New Jersey Criminal Podcast. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Kevin A. Gregg. Kevin is with Kurzban, Tetzeli & Pratt, based out of Miami. He's located in San Diego. He's a partner, and his primary area is immigration law. A lot of my listeners know that anytime we have a client who is facing criminal charges but also has immigration issues, always raises a ton of red flags. And I'm thrilled to have Kevin join us today to give us his expertise in this area, starting out really with some basics on immigration and then delving into some more particular aspects of things that criminal defense attorneys need to know. Kevin's a 2013 graduate of Boston University School of Law. He went to University of Florida, graduating in 2009. He's admitted to the California bar, the Florida bar, and I'm happy to have you here, Kevin. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Meg. It's my pleasure. And, I'm sitting here nodding my head as you're saying red flags and immigration, realizing that actually no one's ever going to see me nodding my head because, of course, this is a podcast.
Right, exactly. But I can see you, and I know. So, thanks so much for taking the time. We're sitting here, it's a Friday night, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. And I'm interested, I'll tell you that way back when I was a tax attorney, believe it or not, about 20 years ago. And when I was working for a tax firm in Philadelphia, there was a partner that I worked with that had a little bit of an interest in immigration law. And we're talking, this is the late 90s. And I at that point was really interested in helping him out with that. But back then all I remember is that we had this big giant blue book where we would photocopy, applications and forms out of that book, fill them out and send them in. Now, clearly a lot's changed in the last 20 years, not only with how things are done, but also with the practice of immigration. And, I'm first of all curious to hear how you got kind of involved in immigration law and how you, what led you to this part of the practice.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And yeah, you read my bio about when I graduated, so I wasn't in the game in the early 90s, but I do know enough to know that it was chaos. I'm a junior partner with Ira Kurzban's firm. He's kind of the godfather of immigration. He's been around a long time, taking a bunch of immigration cases to the Supreme Court. We actually have one right now called Patel v. U.S. Attorney General, which is just a crazy case that I won't get into. It's all about jurisdiction, probably put everybody to sleep.
I'll have you back for that one.
We'll be back for that one, but the Supreme Court will probably issue a decision in the spring. We intend to win. But, it was just crazy. And a lot of that craziness, they tried to change in 1996 and 97. The Newt Gingrich Congress kind of forced a very harsh immigration bill down President Bill Clinton's throat, and he did sign it. And that's kind of what has governed us ever since. But I get ahead of ourselves, but some of that might be a product of the chaos that was immigration in the 80s and 90s. Before I end that rant, it is important, I think, to note, and it's noted often that, I'm progressive politically. Most immigration attorneys are, and when the conservative side does talk about amnesty and laments amnesty and that we need to be a country of laws, there is only one president that I know of that has granted amnesty to non-citizens, and it's President Reagan in the 80s and the Republican Party. So I think it's always important to keep that in mind.
Right.
My path to immigration, I was fortunate enough to get a very good internship during my second year in law school in D.C. with the Office of Immigration Litigation, which defends immigration decisions in the Federal Circuit Courts of Appeals. Probably was punching above my weight with that internship, but I think I did well, and I was very fortunate to get it. And it turned into an extended internship, which made me pretty marketable for what's called the Attorney General's Honors Program, which, if you have any law student listeners, I highly recommend. It's kind of a foot into the door into the DOJ. And one of the easiest ways to get into, because they have the most positions, is to be a attorney advisor, also like a judicial law clerk for the immigration courts. Essentially, you're a armchair law clerk or kind of staff attorney-ish for an immigration court. And after that interview, you get to pick your cities. I said San Diego. Might as well go there. It seems nice. And I was fortunate to get that position. It's a 2-year position. Now it's actually could be permanent. They changed that after I left, maybe because of something I said.
So this is when you were in law school?
No, so that's after law school. So it's right out. You're only eligible right out of law school. So it's a 2-year position, kind of like a judicial clerkship.
Okay.
And that's what really got me into immigration. Then I took sorry if you hear it, there's a dog next door from where I'm recording. I don't know.
It's all good. I've got my dog right here too, so we're all good. We're a dog friendly podcast.
I then from there I had a federal clerkship in the Southern District of Florida, and I don't know if I was going to come back to immigration. It doesn't pay as high as some forms. I got a lot of student loans, and if you're not with the right firm, and I am with the right firm now, but if you're not, you might have to make ethical choices to make money. Sometimes your clients aren't the most ethical. Sometimes you're overworked to make money and you start becoming unethical. I had seen that working for the immigration judges, but during my federal clerkship, towards the end of it, a guy who was talking about Muslim bans won the presidency. And I said, well, I might know something about that. And it turned out that Ira Kurzban, who has a long history of suing the federal government and pushing for progressive immigration reform, was based in Miami. So I shot him an email, and here I am.
That's great. And it's another warm state.
It's another, yeah. So I am from South Florida. So my parents were happy. Oh, wait a minute. Dog fight. My parents were happy that I came back and sad that I had to leave. But
so I think I want to,
so
I think I just want to start with some real basics. I mean, and what I find is that at least where I practice, there are a handful of immigration attorneys, but not as many as you would think. And obviously, immigration law, you practice in the federal courts, correct?
Well, even that question's complicated.
Right.
Actually, most immigration attorneys don't practice in federal court the way you think about it, like, appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. There is an immigration court system, which those judges are technically not judges. They're appointed to 10-year terms by the attorney general. There are con law professors who think the whole system is unconstitutional. They're not even Article I judges under Congress. They're essentially Article II judges under the president.
Okay.
And in immigration, the Attorney General of the United States can issue precedential decisions that look like Supreme Court decisions that are then binding on the immigration judges. So it is this weird pseudo system, and there's a whole movement to make immigration judges Article I judges, kind of like bankruptcy judges. I support that movement, but it hasn't happened yet.
So are immigration judges, is it like tax court or bankruptcy court? Is it kind of a separate court system? Is that how it works?
Yeah, it's a separate court system, but again, the tax and the bankruptcy courts are more official. I mean, if you want to think about it, those are Article I judges. I think the circuits are in charge of those judges, but again, immigration judges technically, and this is the Attorney General talking, not me, technically they're only simply employees of the Department of Justice. I mean, no small thing, but for constitutional purposes, they're not really judges. To do that, you would want to make them like bankruptcy or tax judges, and there's a movement for that. And again, I'm supportive of that.
Got it. So what about geographically? How does the system work from a geographical standpoint? I know here in New Jersey, we've got folks that are immigration attorneys that I know that are running up to North Jersey, Philadelphia, that kind of thing. How does it work geographically? Very basic question.
No, and every basic question it gets very complicated because geographically and jurisdictionally in immigration, there's really 3 different avenues. If you're in immigration court, you've already done something that's not great. You don't want to be in immigration court because immigration court decides whether you're going to be deported, whether you are deportable, and if not, and if you are, whether you can stay here because you're eligible for a form of relief. But, the way this system is envisioned, right, is you're supposed to be out of the country, asking to come in, getting a visa. Maybe you want to come in to marry a U.S. citizen, 90 Day Fiance, that show. That's about getting a visa. Or maybe you have come in through a refugee resettlement program, and we're then going to accept you. The Trump administration stopped taking refugees, essentially, and the Biden administration has brought us back up to what we used to do. And so there's that, and that's through the Department of State consulates at embassies abroad. Some immigration attorneys do that. If you're already in the U.S., usually if you came here illegally, then you can apply for benefits if you're still here legally. Say you're on a temporary visa, like a tourist visa. Or usually, let's say you're on a temporary visa because you have a temporary work visa that lasts sometimes many years, and you marry a U.S. citizen. Well, then you can apply for a green card. And this is just one example. And that is through USCIS. You file your application, and assuming you've done everything correctly, compliance with the law, you're a good person, USCIS should approve that application, and you get your green card, and you're on a path to citizenship eventually. You can apply in 3 or 5 years, depending on the basis. And
so you may not under that scenario ever appear before a court.
Right. You're appearing before a USCIS officer, non-adversarial situation, although your client is testifying under oath the whole time, which, as you know, is a terrifying experience, no matter who's asking the questions.
Right.
But that's how it's supposed to work if you're in the U.S. Now, not everybody can do that, but those who can, should and do. And so if you're in immigration court, either something happened at your USCIS interview, or you were never eligible for it anyway.
Or you've committed a crime and you're on your way out the door.
Right. And so, but that would be either situation. Either you weren't eligible for anything, you committed you were here unlawfully already, or you applied for, let's say, a green card with USCIS, but like you said, you have a conviction, and USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, says that bars you from a green card. If that happens, they're going to put you in removal proceedings and have an immigration judge decide all of it.
And then the jurisdictional point becomes more important.
Geographically. And so, right. So if you're in immigration court, it depends where the court is. There is a court in Newark, in Jersey. There's a court in Philadelphia. I want to say there's definitely other courts in the Third Circuit. They just escape me. Yeah. There's about 50, maybe 60 courts, and they keep popping up, especially at the border. Under the last administration, sometimes you would have tent courts at the border. Now you have the Remain in Mexico policy that you might have heard about, the MPP. The Trump administration started it. The Biden administration stopped it. The Fifth Circuit said the Biden administration had to start it up again. The Supreme Court allowed that, and so here we are. MPP, Remain in Mexico, is back. So those individuals are actually in Mexico, and they get bussed in or over video during the pandemic to courts in essentially Texas, Arizona, and Southern California.
So it seems to me there's just so many different facets of the immigration practice. Now, you've got individuals that perhaps are either here and want to remain here or want to come here and become citizens. So basically individuals that want to apply to become a United States citizen, one area of immigration work. On the other hand, you have individuals who are fighting deportation, the other end of the spectrum. So before we get into each of those different areas, do you handle both of those?
Absolutely.
Okay. And as an attorney that is barred in California and Florida, can you handle cases all over the country? How does that work?
Immigration court allows you to appear in any immigration court or USCIS office so long as you're barred in one court.
Okay, so any listener that's an attorney in New Jersey could reach out to you for consultation or for services for their clients here in New Jersey.
That's right. And while I and the firm do everything, my specialty is kind of criminal immigration law, the intersection of criminal law and immigration law. We can get to that. Obviously, we will in a bit. That's why I wanted to talk to you on your podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I want to talk about that. I just want to make sure, because it's one. And look, I'm being really candid here. The the different avenues to become a United States citizen, I don't know about. I want to hear about, overview from you about how that works. I mean, we all hear about different things about DACA and this and that and the other. I don't really know. Can you give us, I'm asking a lot probably here, but can you give us maybe just a couple minute, really quick, down and dirty overview of how somebody becomes a United States citizen?
I absolutely can. And before I do, there is this one other facet of immigration practice, and that is traditional federal court. We are one of the only firms that does federal court actions. And if you're in federal court, it's usually because you, as the non-citizen counsel, are suing the federal government, not the other way around. And so we file actions under the Administrative Procedures Act for unlawful denials. If you get your naturalization citizenship application denied, there's a straight statutory right cause of action in federal court. Our firm represented, and I'll get to this because it relates to your question you just asked, we represented the 60,000 temporary protected status holders, TPS, from Haiti. And we obtained an injunction in the Eastern District of New York, preventing the Trump administration from getting rid of TPS for Haiti, which would have resulted in the essentially removability of 60,000 Haitians and their U.S. citizen children.
Well, don't let me forget. I want you to come back and talk about that on a whole nother episode, because that really is an area that I know we can talk about for a long time and I'm interested in.
Yeah, and that's the Sage case, and TPS for Haiti is back. The Biden administration brought it back, and not because of our lawsuit, but the lawsuit did prevent it from going away during the last administration. So that gets to your question: how does one become a U.S. citizen? And unless I'm missing something, I don't think I am. You have to be a green card holder before you can be a citizen in all circumstances. We call that a lawful permanent resident, an LPR. Colloquially, it's a green card holder. And depending on how you got your green card,
that's going to be my next question. How do you get a green card?
And that's the gold standard in immigration. I mean, obviously naturalization is, but usually you're talking green card. And after you have a green card, depending on how you got it, you can wait 3 or 5 years, and depending on how you got the green card, and then you are eligible to naturalize. But the real, where the rubber meets the road usually is, how do you get the green card? Mm-hmm. The standard way people think about is being married to a U.S. citizen. That is one way that you can become eligible for a green card. But after the change in law that I mentioned that went into effect in 1997, if you came to the U.S. unlawfully at first, even if you married a U.S. citizen, you cannot adjust to green card status in the U.S. You have to leave the U.S. and do it through an embassy. But the second you leave the U.S., this is the gotcha from 97, you're barred from coming back for 10 years because you've been here unlawfully. Mm-hmm. So it's this catch-22. Mm-hmm. If you entered unlawfully at first, you cannot adjust except for some exceptions. There's always exceptions, of course. You can't adjust to green card status, even if you're married to a U.S. citizen. Mm-hmm. And there are other ways you can be eligible for a green card. If you are sponsored by an employer under the right circumstances, if you have a child that is over the age of 21 and they're a U.S. citizen, they can apply for you. If you have a sibling who's a U.S. citizen, now some of those you have to wait a long time, and some of those don't have a wait. And then there's the EB-5, which is a visa that actually the Senate is playing games with at the moment. But essentially, if you have invested a certain amount of money right now, I believe it's $1.2 or $1.7 million in a qualifying project in the United States, then that gives you a path to a green card for yourself and your family. So there are all these paths to get a green card.
But if you are here illegally, you're going to have to leave and not be able to come back for 10 years. That's basically the short version.
Yes. If you are here illegally, you have no path to getting a green card affirmatively except one. And again, caveats everything, not legal advice, but except one, and that is applying for asylum. If you get asylum, if you receive asylum, then after 1 year, you can apply for a green card, and then after 5 years you can apply for naturalization. But asylum is very hard to get, and again, there's caveats, but generally if you've come here unlawfully,
because I have a lot of clients who are here, they are not documented, They may have a minor offense, and they ask me for, a name of an immigration attorney because they want to stay. And so basically, and perhaps they have had a child with a United States citizen, or they've married a United States citizen. So you're saying that those individuals are going to have a difficult time even getting a green card without leaving for 10 years, basically?
As with all good attorneys, it depends.
It's a cap, yeah, right. But general rule.
Yes, but first of all, there's a difference between being able to stay and having a green card. You can stay lawfully in pseudo legal status without having a green card, sometimes indefinitely. Look at the temporary protected status. Certain Somalis have had TPS since the early 90s, so that's a long time. But there's also a difference between being in this country without authorization and coming here illegally.
Well, different types of visas.
Well, for example, if your client that you're talking about came here as a tourist initially and overstayed, if that person married a U.S. citizen, they are actually eligible to get a green card in the U.S. because they initially came here lawfully. But if they hopped the border and they weren't inspected or admitted by an immigration officer, then that person would have to leave the U.S. and then they are subject to the 10-year bar. But under the Obama administration, there is a waiver of that 10-year bar that you can apply for and get approved before you leave. And so then once it's approved, approval in hand, you leave, sit for your interview, roll the dice slightly and hope the consulate will recognize that waiver and then come back with a green card.
Does it matter if you came in unlawfully before or after 97?
Good question. It does not matter, but if you have a what's called a I-130 or I-140 petition, which is the initial petition that starts the process, if that petition was filed for you by an employer or your qualifying relative before April 30th, 2001, then you don't have to leave, even if the basis changes. So, for example, if your father, who was a U.S. citizen, filed an I-130 petition for you in March of 2001.
And explain what I-130 is.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. We get in the weeds quick. So your standard green card application case is I-130 plus I-485. Those are the two forms. The I-130 says...
in that old book that I had years ago.
Right.
All right.
The I-130 is the U.S. government saying, we recognize that this person is in a valid relationship, is in a valid marriage with a U.S. citizen. Or we recognize that this person is the parent of a U.S. citizen who's over the age of 21. Seems simple, it usually is, but of course there's a lot of marriage fraud. So sometimes an I-130 is a difficult thing. You have to prove that the marriage is valid and not solely for immigration purposes. That does happen. But if the I-130 is approved, then you are potentially eligible for a green card, and that's the I-485. And then there are all these things you have to prove to show that you warrant a green card, that you warrant it as a matter of discretion, that you don't have a crime that disqualifies you, that you entered legally, like you said. That's what we've been. So that's the second step. And so if that I-130 petition was filed by, let's say, a U.S. citizen parent in March of 2001, and you never adjusted status for a variety of reasons to a green card holder, and then the parent dies, let's put that. So you can't adjust now, but you stuck around without status, and 20 years later you marry a U.S. citizen. You can then do another I-130, and you get credited for that pre-April 2001 I-130, and so the former statutory framework applies, and you don't have to leave. So I mean, it's
a very long process. And the one thing I do remember from the very short period of time, years and years ago, that I was filling out these forms for the partner was that, one little mistake, one little incorrect letter or initial or middle initial would kick it back, and it would all have to get refiled. So really complicated, detail-oriented practice.
Kick it back is the best case scenario. An I-485 at this point is 19 pages long, and at the end of it has 80 yes or no questions signed under penalty of perjury. If your client, who could be doing it by themselves before they come to you, checks the wrong yes or no, there's an argument that they've committed a criminal offense and a willful misrepresentation for immigration purposes.
Right. So, before I get into, types of crimes that could get you deported, what are some ways for a person to be here lawfully without pursuing a green card?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I did want to talk about DACA, because that's what a lot of people
and that's what I was going to ask you
about.
about. Like, I hear all of this about DACA. I don't know that much about it. I'd like you to explain it to us.
Absolutely. We'll do so right now. And when I talk about DACA, I always start off by saying the only reason DACA still exists right now is because Justice Roberts wasn't willing to go that extra leg and found that the Trump administration violated the Administrative Procedures Act in getting rid of it. And an APA, so that's one justice before the supermajority on the Supreme Court of conservative justices. And the APA is it's easy to remedy. I mean, Justice Roberts and the majority essentially said the Trump administration did it wrong, but here's how you could do it right. But then the Trump administration did not win re-election. So, if Justice Roberts doesn't make that decision, or if the Trump administration does win a second term, DACA's probably gone, along with the 1 million individuals who were brought here as children, who are my age, except they were just born in a different country at this point. Some are younger, a few are older. I'm 35.
You mean that they could be deported?
They would have all been subject to deportation, almost all of them. Now, will they be deported immediately? No. We don't have the capacity as a country to deport 1 million people all at once, but it would have been chaos, and they would have all been subject to it. I mean, DACA is... I'm passionate about DACA. I'm passionate about immigration law, and I wasn't a lawyer at the time, but DACA the context is important. There was a bipartisan DREAM Act in Congress, the Gang of 8 in the Senate, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, including Marco Rubio and John McCain, and I can't recall the other 2 Republicans. We had bipartisan immigration reform, which would have included the DREAM Act, and it had a majority in the House as well, but the Freedom Caucus would not let John Boehner bring it to a vote. That's my understanding of the history there. And because of that, we never got it. And so the Obama administration, in response, created DACA. And what DACA is essentially a policy of prosecutorial discretion, which says we have limited resources as a country. We have millions of individuals in this country without status. We are not going to target this subgroup of individuals for removal. And at the same time, we're going to give you work authorization and certain other benefits under the law. Those individuals are people who were brought here, and I, don't quote me on all of the requirements, brought here before 2007, under the age of 16. There are a variety of requirements, and they're very, very strict requirements too for not getting it or getting it taken away. I mean, if you have 2 misdemeanors, you're not eligible for DACA, or you'll get it taken away. And 2 misdemeanors can be a DUI and refusal to blow. That's 2 misdemeanors, even if it's the same
one offense.
Incident.
Right.
One of I'm not condoning DUIs, but it's something that we in criminal law you don't think so hard about. Same for temporary protected status, by the way. And so DACA has enabled these individuals to get student loans, to go to college, to have work authorization. People whose sibling was born 2 years after them, born in the U.S., and they weren't, and they had to watch their sibling, have this success. They weren't even allowed to go to college, for example. In some states, they couldn't get student loans until DACA came into force. And it gave a lot of these people, now almost 1 million of them, who are my age, a path forward. But then there are every year, and currently, there are proposals to take the DACA people and other people with pseudo status, such as temporary protected status, and provide them a path to a green card. Mm-hmm. But you cannot pass the Senate. It gets filibustered. The parliamentarian has said that it is not the type of bill that can only amass 51%. It has to have, all the stuff with all the crazy Senate rules. And so now certain DACA people, certain people with temporary protected status, and temporary protected status, it's another one of these things. It says your country that we have designated is too dangerous. It's not safe to return. So everybody from that country in the country, when it's not safe to return, can remain here temporarily until it's safe to return. In the Haiti case, Haiti got TPS due to the horrific earthquake that happened in 2000. I believe it's January 2010. Killed tens of thousands of people. And then the cholera epidemic right after that, brought to Haiti by the United Nations workers. We gave Haiti TPS.
So you're saying, and I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but you're saying some of the immigration laws that are out there are dependent upon the country from which the person is from.
Oh, yes. TPS is
to further complicate the complicated immigration rules.
Right. TPS is the most notable one. But
can you say that again? What is that an acronym for?
Temporary protected status.
Okay. TPS.
TPS. But there are paths to green cards that are country specific. And I'm not going to get into it. It gets crazy. But the knock on
this is
TPS,
why we need experts like you.
Thank you. The knock on TPS is that it's not always temporary. Like I mentioned, Somalia has had it since the early 90s, but Somalia has been in a civil war since the early 90s. And it's not to say that if you're a Somali who comes to America right now, you can get TPS. But in the case of Somalia, if you've been here since TPS was designated in whatever dates it was in the 1990s, you've been able to stay here. So Somalis get deported, but not the Somalis with TPS. That's just a Somalia example. And so if you have TPS, if you have DACA, and you initially came here legally, let's say, again, you overstayed a tourist visa, which I'm not condoning, but it's just an example. Or you came here, let's DACA, you're 2 years old. You're from, I don't know, Brazil. Your mom brings you here at 2 years old with a tourist visa, and you overstay.
And now you're 20.
And now you're 30,
right?
and you've had DACA since 2012. Let's say you came here legally on a tourist visa when you were 28 years ago. So that means if you marry a U.S. citizen now, you have a path to get a green card in the United States because you entered legally, even though you were 2 and you weren't doing anything. But you are incredibly different from the same 2-year-old from Brazil who was brought over the Rio Grande River from Mexico illegally, because that individual was brought here illegally. So that individual, even if they marry a U.S. citizen, doesn't have a path to a green card without doing the whole leave the U.S., come back thing.
Right. And DACA, is that dependent upon when you entered? Is there a year that DACA went into effect? Is that 97? 97?
No, DACA goes into, that's the Obama administration policy in 2012.
2012, okay.
And again, don't quote me on it, but it gets so, I believe you had to be here prior to 2007 for a certain amount of time, and you have to prove that. And so...
I see. Right,
yes,
so the timing becomes an issue.
Sometimes the timing becomes very much the issue, and I it escapes me if the Biden administration redesignated DACA. I can't remember what's happening, extended DACA, but I don't believe so. They're accepting new applications for DACA, but only if you meet the old DACA requirements. So, but DACA is for all of the impact DACA has, 1 million, people who are essentially the backbone of our economy now, right? It's a lot of nurses, a lot of critical people in their 20s and 30s, right, during the pandemic.
Well, I mean, I'm from South Jersey. A lot of migrant workers here under DACA.
And so with all of that, it's very frail. I mean, a judge in the I think it's the Southern District of Texas, notwithstanding the fact that it's now been 10 years, that this judge just found DACA unconstitutional. Just happened last year. That's being fought, and it's probably going to the Supreme Court. I don't know, next year. In the DACA decision, Justice Thomas, at least, and maybe Alito, or maybe it's the other way around, was very clear that they should have been addressing the constitutionality of DACA. And again, it only survived getting terminated by the Trump administration, which everybody agrees. I mean, Obama created it. Another president can terminate it if they do it right. It's hanging on by a thread. So it is regardless of how you think about it, it is a crazy way to talk about the lives of 1 million individuals forming the backbone of the workforce of our country and the,
right.
The necessary labor during the pandemic.
Sure.
And don't forget to subscribe anywhere you listen.